Cuba, a country marked by history, where you can feel the consequences every day. Despite this, they call it the Pearl of the Caribbean. But what makes this country so interesting? Is it the old classic cars that take you back in time as soon as you see them? Or the old houses from the colonial era that are collapsing more and more but still retain their beauty? Or the revolution that can be felt everywhere, in every corner of the island? What makes this country so unique? We traveled around the island for 3 weeks to investigate this question. This is our trip through Cuba. Our journey through Cuba started with Alberto and his Clásico. In this case, El Clásico is a Chevrolet Bel Air 283 and Alberto is a typical Cuban. Always happy, always singing. From there, our trip to the capital started. La Habana and its #1 site, El Capitolio. But the city has so much more to offer. For example, more classic cars, big pictures of famous revolutionaries, and a beautiful coastline called Malecon. However, we started our first day at Chinatown. Yes, you heard right, Chinatown, in the middle of the Caribbean. But not everything was foreign to us. Some things reminded us of home. From this point, we decided to explore Havana on a different way. And this guy helped us. He's a proud driver of a pink 1952 Chevrolet Styling Deluxe. So we drove again through Havana. And our first stop was at the most famous square in Cuba, La Plaza de la Revolución, with the monument of José Martí and the big images of Che Guevara and Camilo Cienfuegos. At that place, we realized how present the revolution is still today. However, it should not be the last signs of revolution. Afterwards, we continued to the Malecon and its anglers at the coast. There, we spent a few evenings just watching the beautiful sunsets and oldtimers. The next day, we walked through the historic center, Old Havana, or as the locals call it, La Habana Vieja. That was the moment when we saw real life. The tourism steadily decreased, and we saw the normal life of Cubans. In between this, the beautiful, colorful houses from the colonial era. Even if some of them were badly damaged, they have never lost their splendor from the past. In addition to them, there were countless other sites that always reminded us of Cuba's history. Shortly before the first Advent came, we continued our trip. Now we headed east, towards the beach. Before I could attempt a handstand in the ocean, or before we saw the sun rays through the palm trees, or before we discovered this lizard, we had to drive first with the national bus company Via Azul. After 4 hours, we reached the first palm trees and waves of Varadero. However, we didn't see the beach first, but instead of that many old classic cars, which reminded us of Havana. We also saw various animals on our way to the beach, like lizards, goats or chicken. And there was Charlie, a sweet little Yorkshire Terrier from our lovely hosts. The only problem was that he didn't like cameras. Finally, we reached the entrance of the beach, and there we saw the most palm trees, which looked like a border between us and the beach. But between them, we could already see the blue of the ocean. At this point, we just stayed on the beach for 4 days, just to relax and practice handstands, even if they didn't always work. As time passed, the sun slowly set on the horizon, and the beach felt like a magical place. After a delicious coconut, the beach turned dark, and we used the sunset to take a last walk along the beach before we heading further east. After cooling off in the ocean, we continued our journey to one of the most beautiful places, Trinidad, the colorful colonial city. In addition to the small houses which all have a different color, it's the locals who fill the small town with life. In the middle of it all, the impressive church tower, where we had a wonderful view all over the city. Next to the things that define Cuba, we also met old friends again. But Trinidad has more to offer. For example, this truck called the Soviet Beast, a remnant of the Cold War which took us outside the city to an outpost, where we had a spectacular view. From this point we walked to the Park Guanayara, a rainforest with huge plants, trees and rocks that you feel tiny compared to them. We were also able to marvel at countless plants and flowers that grew in all possible angles. By visiting the national park, we saw the greatest variety of plants in Cuba. The next day, we took a catamaran for 2 hours across the Atlantic Ocean to discover Cayo Iguana, an island in the middle of nowhere, but still beautiful and full of surprises. We quickly realized that we were not alone. The island is home to many iguanas, some tree rats and a lot of crabs, which change their homes with each other. After discovering another beautiful place in Cuba, we went back to Trinidad. In between this, we also jumped into the ocean. At the end of each day, we enjoyed the sunset that dyed the city in beautiful colors. Between the different places we visited in Cuba, we also made a few stops in lesser-known areas. Some of them turned out to be the country's culinary treasures. Treasures like these classic cars that we saw everywhere in Santiago de Cuba. Or treasures like this cathedral, a beautiful church that shapes the cityscape, with the 2 towers and the angel in the middle. We continue to discover more and more things that characterize the city. For example, the many old motorcycles and bicycles, which we found in every street. Or the sites of revolution and national pride on every wall or book. Or the buildings and colors which reminded us to the other cities, but they are still different. Locals often told us that Santiago de Cuba is the real Cuba. The same impressions we had during a stopover on our way to Trinidad in a small town called Sancti Spiritus. The skyline is characterized by an impressive church tower too, which takes different shades of blue depending on the daytime. In addition to the beautiful old colonial buildings, Sancti Spiritus always surprised us with little things, like a little amusement park or interesting vehicles. But the biggest surprise was our balcony, from which we could see the whole city, sometimes also from our porch swing. On our way back to our last place we wanted to visit, we stayed in Cienfuegos for one day. This city was also characterized by a town hall in the city center. However, it wasn't the magnificent building that fascinated us. It was the historical French influence. On the other hand, we also saw a lot of similarities, such as the old cars. But the city was also marked by various signs of the revolution in every corner of the streets. As already said, even the most inconspicuous places in Cuba fascinated us, and even if they are all similar in the end, each one has surprised us with their different landmarks. The last stop on our round trip was Viñales, a place that had stood still in time, a place surrounded by huge rocks and beautiful nature, where the most famous cigars are made. However, our journey through Viñales starts at the town center. From this point, we walked to the huge rocky hills, called Mogotes. These remaining hills are the real landmarks of Viñales. Next to them, you felt tiny. Even the huge and imposing painting Mural de la Prehistoria was insignificant to the surrounding Mogotes. Afterwards, we walked past the many tobacco plantations and beautiful flowers to the other side of the valley. From there, we had a spectacular view of Valle de Viñales. With this view, we ate to a beautiful setting at the restaurant El Mirador. The next day, we visited the tobacco fields to learn the secrets behind the famous Cuban cigars. But we didn't do it on ourselves. We were supported by a Cuban who has lived his whole life there. May I introduce El Panchon, a local who knows Viñales like no other. He introduced us to the other locals first. Then he showed us the native flora and fauna of Viñales. And finally, he introduced us to Raul, a proud tobacco farmer of the region. He explained us the process from the tobacco plant to the Cuban cigar. At the end of the day, we had a wonderful time in Viñales, and the tour of El Panchon was, next to the atmosphere of the whole valley, one of the highlights of our round trip. So, at the beginning of the video, we asked ourselves, What makes Cuba special? Why is this country unique? And why we will not forget this travel? We think the answer can be found in the characteristics that define Cuba. It's not just the cars or the revolution, the national pride, the flora and fauna, the locals or the buildings. It's the totality of these characteristics that can't be found anywhere else. And these features made our round trip through Cuba an unforgettable experience.